How many atrocities does Israel have to commit before this government will take action? How many children does it have to kill before it will place sanctions on the state of Israel? How many schools does Israel have to bomb before Labor will end two-way arms trade with Israel and stop the export of F-35 parts that are in Israeli jets currently committing atrocities in Gaza? Now, we know now that the official death toll in Gaza is now over 40,000. Over 70% of those are women and children, and we hear these numbers a lot. We hear them a lot, but what we don't often do is think about the human consequences and stories behind these deaths, the horrific nature of them. And as I read these out, I want people to think about, why is it then that when these atrocities are being committed at a systematic scale, at a deliberate and systematic scale, carrying out a genocide in Gaza right now, why is it then that the Australian government and the Labor Party won't end two-way arms trade with Israel, or just like they sanctioned Russia, sanction the state of Israel? Let's talk about Mohammed Bar. Let's talk about Mohammed Bar, one of the deaths, people killed, children killed by Israel. Mohammed Bar had Down syndrome and autism. He was attacked by a combat dog when Israeli soldiers raided his family's home in Gaza. His mother said Mohammed was pleading with the dog while it was attacking him. He said, "Enough, Habibi, enough." Habibi translates as "my love." The soldiers put Mohammed in another room and forced his family to leave with their home without him. When they returned a few days later, he was dead. Things like this are happening every day in Gaza right now. Every day, at a systematic scale, admitted by Israeli ministers that this is their goal. This is their goal. And what does this government do? Nothing. How many horrors have to occur? Is there a number that this government is looking at? Is there a number of kids that have to be murdered by the state of Israel before this government will take action? Let's talk about another one. What about 3-year-old Emad Abu al-Qura? He was killed outside his home when he went to buy fruit with his cousin. He was shot in the head by an Israeli sniper. His cousin was also shot and killed. In fact, what we know is that since October 7th, 115 infants, newborn babies, have been born and then killed. 564 schools have been either partially damaged or destroyed as Israel has deliberately targeted them and bombed them. What will it take? What will it take? And the gall of this government, for whenever they face criticism about the complicity in this genocide going on in Gaza right now, they talk about social cohesion. You know, people have eyes. They see what's going on in Gaza. The reason that people are upset is because they see stories like this and then they look to their government to show some moral leadership, to show some international leadership, to expect them, when they've seen this government sanction Russia, take out over 1,000 autonomous sanctions against Russia for their illegal invasion of Ukraine. And then they look and say, well, surely this government, with any sense of morality, any sense of justice, any sense of humanity, would turn around and do the same thing to the state of Israel and sanction the state of Israel. But apparently not. And the reality is, this is what we know. Every time that the state of Israel commits an atrocity like that, or carries out a bombing of a school or a hospital, every time Israel does that, and then they look around the world and they look to countries like Australia, and then they do nothing. And Israel is emboldened to keep acting. I mean, we have a situation right now where polio has re-emerged in Gaza. Just think about the devastating impacts that will have on Gazan children. Do their lives not matter? And there is a lot of Australians right now who think that they should be proud of this country. And one way of being proud of this country is that we would have a government that said no more. When we see atrocities like this, we say no more and we take action. Because for children like Mohammed Bar, whose last hours were scared and alone, bleeding and dying to death, as he couldn't even die in the arms of his family, scared and alone, And his story is just one of the over 15,000 Palestinian children have been murdered by Israel. And what is this about? Like, genuinely, why is it that the Australian government cannot take a single action against the State of Israel? Why is it that this Australian government, who has signed a $917 million defence contract with Elbit Systems, an Israeli weapons company that has been blacklisted by other countries around the world for war crimes committed with their weapons in occupied Palestinian territories, why is it they can't even cancel that contract? Why is it they can't follow the Netherlands and ban the export of F-35 parts going into Israeli jets? Why is it that they can't take sanctions? Is it perhaps their slavish loyalty to the United States? And when will this country learn and this government learn, whether it be Labor or Liberal? By the way, the Liberal Party never reckoned with their disastrous invasion of Iraq. What is it? Iraq, Afghanistan. How many times do we have to follow slavishly into a war backed by the United States and look at the consequences, the millions dead? And the reality is that it makes the world less safe. Australia backed the US invasion of Afghanistan to apparently get rid of the Taliban. And what do we end up with? After 20 years and hundreds of billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of deaths? The Taliban. They're still there. And what happened when Australia backed the invasion of Iraq, which some estimates said led to 1 million dead? 1 million dead. What did we end up with? ISIS. Good on you guys. You worked out real well. Great stuff. I mean, the lack of seriousness and the lack of intellectual capacity on either side of this House to deal with the consequences of a foreign policy that this country backs that leads to the death and suffering of millions of people. What will it take? And the message that a lot of people hear is that, well, for this government, when you compare what's going on and the sanctions that they've taken about Russia with the sanctions that they refuse to take out against the State of Israel, is somehow Palestinian lives matter less. Well, you know what? That view is not represented by the people in the community, because people in the community and people across Australia have a different view. They have a different view. They see when our country has a responsibility created by the fact that this country is engaged in two-way arms trade with the State of Israel as it carries out a genocide, a responsibility that says this is a country that's part of the international community. Well, that responsibility warrants actions. And where this government does not take actions, then that creates a complicity in the actions that the State of Israel is carrying out. And at the end of the day, and I'll take those objections because the lack of humanity in this House, what about Mohammed Bar, left to die with autism and Down syndrome, not even with his family? Oh, great. And you talk about the deaths on October 7th, which the Greens have condemned and are disgraceful. But that does not justify the deaths of 15,000 children. That does not justify the deaths of men, women and children, unnecessary deaths that only create less...
Authorised by J. McCall, Australian Greens, Canberra.